Chapter 12. Return to Calais. In 3 days' time, the caravan of the merchant Camus reached the walls of the city of Calais, the great port city of ancient days. Earlier that day, Camus had dispatched the surly horsemen to the city to let them know of the caravan's impending arrival. The caravan was stopped at the city gate, where a taxmaster of the king assessed the goods they carried. Halima peered through the curtains as Camus spoke with the guards in the watchtower, making arrangements. The widow told the others, "Best be prepared to wait here a while. This will take a long time. The king will not be denied his share of any wealth brought into the city." Halima closed the curtain and leaned back. The carriage swayed as the elephant that bore it shifted restlessly from giant foot to giant foot. Soon she would be face to face with King Ali-Badi, and she would learn how he came to sit on her father's throne. Perhaps she would learn the reason for his war against the Abaka, the people of the mountain, and she could convince him to bring the bloody conflict to an end. They sat there for a good hour, until they were all sweating like pigs. Flies buzzed against the silk curtains of the carriage, eager to drink their perspiration. "How long will they keep us here?" demanded Falashideh. Halima opened the curtains again and saw 3 soldiers on horseback, trotting along the line, inspecting each carriage of the caravan. Further off, she could see at least 70 other soldiers atop the city wall. Halima pulled the curtain shut. She suddenly felt trapped and unable to breathe in the close quarters of the carriage, but there was nowhere to run. A moment later, the curtains were ripped open, and one of the soldiers stuck in his flat, ugly face. His features were dotted with the tribal scars of the people of the snake. The dancing women cowered. The soldier demanded, "Which of you claims to be Princess Halima, daughter of King Babatunde?" The widow spoke for them all. "Stupid man! Do you see any kind of princess here? We are dancers, coming to entertain the court of King Ali-Badi, ruler of Calais and all the people of the snake." The guard hesitated, scrutinizing the slew of females. "Well, get in or get out?" the widow demanded. The other women cackled, and the ugly soldier shrank back with embarrassment. Outside the carriage, Halima heard another voice grunt, "Make the rascal earn his gold. He's the one who says he saw her." Suddenly, the surly horseman's face appeared beside that of the ugly soldier. The traitor pointed to Halima and declared emphatically, "She's the one." The ugly soldier told Halima sternly, "Princess, you must come with me." Halima saw that she had no choice. As the women looked on helplessly, Halima clambered over them and crawled into the arms of the ugly soldier, who swung her by the waist to the ground. "What do you want with her?" the widow demanded. "Yes, leave her alone," cried Falashideh. "You slut, shut up and forget what you've seen," the guard told them. The women cursed the soldiers, who ignored them as they escorted Halima off. They rode to the front of the caravan, which stood waiting at the gates of the city. The long line of elephants, horses, and donkeys were still, as if frozen in time. Troops stood waiting on the wall, the officers pacing nervously. Stillness and a sense of impending violence filled the air. It looked as if one person said, "Boo!" Arrows would let fly from all directions. Halima was marched into a guard tower. It was strangely cool inside the dank, narrow stone chamber, and Halima felt a shiver as the guards guided her in and closed the door behind her. The chamber was dark, illuminated only by the light that poured in from 2 small windows. One was at eye level, the other 20 feet high at the top of a stone staircase that spiraled up into the tower. Halima saw Camus in the middle of the chamber and took a step toward him in relief. Then out of the shadows stepped a second man. It was Massimo Kallai, crafty advisor of King Ali-Badi. He who had arranged her marriage to the ruler and fled with him when the party was attacked by the Zimbai. The slave general turned toward her, flashing his crocodile smile and raising his deformed, 3-fingered hand in greeting. Halima instinctively recoiled from him, as if he were a childhood boogeyman returned. "Welcome home, Princess Halima," he said with a bow. His familiar hissing voice made Halima want to hop back, as if from a slithering cobra. Massa Macaulay turned toward the merchant. "In the name of King Al-Gabari, the trustworthy, I thank you, Honorable Kemu, for returning this daughter of the realm to her homeland. We apologize for delaying you here. You may be on your way now. Keeping with the promise the princess made you, gold dust has been loaded into your caravan. As a token of our gratitude, it will be twice the sum that you asked for delivering her safely home. You are free to take your caravan into the city." Kemu's untrusting eyes moved slowly from Massa Macaulay to Halima and back. Somewhat sharply, Massa Macaulay told him, "I am sure it would be in your best interest to leave at once and to speak to no one of this matter." There was a deathly silence. Kemu's eyes wandered about the room, following the spiral staircase up to the high window, where a stream of dust particles hovered in the sunlight. Then he shrugged lazily. "As I told you, I'm a simple merchant. What happens here is not my concern." He turned to Halima. "May I give the princess a parting gift?" Massa Macaulay nodded. Kemu drew from around his neck the tiny pouch he wore, took Halima's hand, and pressed it into her palm. "Please keep this as a memento. Goodbye, sweet princess." Halima could not believe he was abandoning her in this uncertain predicament. After all, he had dozens of armed men with him in the caravan. He turned and strode out of the room. Halima anxiously clenched the little pouch in her hand. Massa Macaulay, slave general and chief adviser to King Al-Gabadi, turned to Halima and considered her through his cold, reptilian eyes. "You've grown even more beautiful than when we first met, princess. Much more," he whispered. "Where is King Al-Gabadi?" she said, ignoring him. "Does he not wish to see me?" Massa Macaulay did not answer, and Halima fought from trembling visibly. "Has he been told I am here?" she demanded. The three-fingered man began to pace back and forth before the narrow slit of a window. Through it, Halima could see the wrinkled gray hides of elephants, now lumbering by as the caravan passed into the city. "Kemu, how can you have abandoned me?" she thought. "I felt sure you were my friend." Massa Macaulay drew from a sheath strapped to his calf a short, jagged-edged dagger, and held it to the light of the window. It glittered, savage-looking as a shark's tooth. "A wicked little blade for wicked little deeds," he hissed. Halima moved toward the doorway, and fast as a lightning bolt, the three-fingered man was there, blocking her path. Halima put her fists on her hips and mustered a defiant stare. "You know that I am betrothed to your lord, King Al-Gabadi." "Yes, princess," Massa Macaulay hissed, stepping closer. "And do you know that there was so much mourning in Calais when King Al-Gabadi announced that you were killed by the Zembai after your marriage to him?" Halima shook her head furiously. "We were never married. There was no ceremony, no oath taken." The three-fingered man continued as if she had not spoken. "And it is through that holy bond of matrimony that King Al-Gabadi inherited your lands and the crown of Calais. It is because of that marriage that he now rules two kingdoms, Calais and our own homeland. The Zembai are our allies by treaty, and the mountain country of the Abaka will be ours through conquest." Massa Macaulay stepped toward Halima again, and she backed against the wall until her shoulders crushed against stone. "So, you see the dilemma," he whispered. "Here you are alive." He stood so close to her she could smell his sour breath. "When you should be dead." He put the fine point of the dagger under her shin and tilted up her face so that she stared into his saurian eyes, her throat exposed. Halima proudly tried not to let her eyes betray her terror, though she was shaking like a virgin about to be taken. Her hand squeezed the tiny pouch so firmly that its contents cut into her hand. "Please, let me pray," she pleaded. Masamacalli scowled contemptuously.
"Please, I beg you," she said. "It is our custom for those about to die to pray for our ancestors, to welcome us among them."
Masamacalli stroked his jaw with his deformed hand, then nodded. Halima dropped to her knees and began to mutter to herself fervently. Masamacalli paced back and forth uncomfortably. Halima rattled off every prayer she knew, thanking the Great One in the sky for every good fortune and appealing to every departed member of her family of the past 6 generations. Finally, Masamacalli clapped his hand over her mouth. "Enough," he hissed impatiently. "It is time to die." He put the razor-sharp blade against her naked throat, preparing to slit her jugular with one savage swipe. "It will be quick, princess," he promised. And now she saw a dark passion in his eyes, and Halima realized at last what it was that gave this strange man joy. She felt the dagger begin to cut into her throat. Then she heard a long, low whistle. Masamacalli released her, and she tumbled forward onto her hands. He staggered back, wearing a mask of fury like a crocodile from which a piece of meat had been abruptly stolen. He pointed in anger at the top of the spiral staircase, where Kemu sat casually on the window ledge, wearing a bemused smile. Halima's heart leapt. She knew her friend would not so easily abandon her. He must have scaled the outside of the tower. The guards outside the door saw him leave, but here he was to defend her. "You," hissed the slave general. "Is this the royal treatment in Calais, or can every visitor expect such special attention?" Kemu said mockingly. The slave general strode toward the foot of the staircase, brandishing his dagger. "You will pay for putting your snout where it doesn't belong, hyena," he growled. Kemu seemed entirely unfazed by the threat. He began to stroll cockily down the stairs, reaching behind him and pulling out the long sword that hung on his back. He twisted the sword in the gleaming sunlight, as if examining it for the first time. "It seems mine is bigger than yours, Snake Man." The slave general slid his dagger back into its sheath. Then he turned to the wall, where an array of spears, shields, and other armaments hung. He pulled a huge curving scimitar off the wall. "I will gut you from your chin to your seed sack," he bellowed. Kemu smirked, resting his blade on his shoulder. "I thought you only fought women." At that, Masamacalli charged up the stairs, raising his blade in anger. But just as he drew near, the wily merchant vaulted off the stairway and landed with cat-like grace on the floor. He pulled Halima to her feet, crying, "Run, princess!" Halima hesitated for a moment, reluctant to abandon her friend, and then she scrambled to the iron door. With some effort, she cracked it open. To her dismay, she saw that a pair of guards stood there. The men turned in surprise. The young woman shoved the door shut and slid fast the iron bolt. She whirled to see Masamacalli and Kemu hacking at each other furiously, the blades filling the air with clatter and sending up a shower of sparks. Their artful lunges and darting retreats were so quick her eyes could barely follow them. She stood watching, riveted in place. Masamacalli was a fierce, formidable warrior, she realized. He soon had Kemu in retreat. "Please do not let this one die for me," she prayed. But in a moment's time, the slave general had driven the merchant to the base of the stairs. He took a mighty swing at Kemu's head. Whoosh! Kemu ducked just in time, and the blade clipped 1 or 2 uneven hairs from the top of his head. The caravan master began to back up the stairs. "You handled that blade pretty well for a man with 3 fingers, he taunted his rival. "Let's see how you fare with 1 arm." He brought down his sword on Masamacalli's wrist, but with the speed of a lizard, the slave general pulled his hand out of the way before the blade hit home. Masamacalli swung at Kemu's legs, and Halima gasped. She expected to see the merchant's limbs come tumbling down the stone steps. Wily Kemu hopped in the air just in time, barely clearing the blade. With savage strength, Masamacalli thrust again and again, while Halima's defender desperately parried the scimitar. Finally, about halfway up the stairs, the merchant fell against the steps. Continuing to parry, he inched up the stone steps on his backside. "Great One in the sky, protect him," Halima pleaded, wringing her hands. But her prayers went unheeded. The 3-fingered general battered the sword out of Kemu's hand. The weapon twirled through the air, hit the floor, and skated across it. The three-fingered general gave a crocodile grin and brought his blade down with all his might toward Kemu's head. The merchant rolled desperately to the right and then to the left as the scimitar slammed into the stone step, nearly amputating first one ear and then the other. Halima, meanwhile, crawled across the stone floor and grabbed Kemu's sword, which was still spinning on the ground. She was ready to throw it to him, but when she looked up, she saw that she was too late. Massa Makalai stood over him on the staircase, one foot planted on his chest. The merchant could not squirm out of the way of the scimitar this time. Massa Makalai screamed in triumph and brought the blade down. But Kemu had not given up yet. He reached for the sheath strapped to the slave general's calf, whipped out the other man's dagger, and quick as a flash plunged it into Massa Makalai's thigh. Massa Makalai howled in agony. Taking advantage of the moment's reprieve, Kemu grabbed the other man's foot with both hands and uprooted him. The three-fingered man went tumbling down the steps. The wily merchant climbed to his feet and ran up to the top of the spiral stairway. "Now I must act," Halima told herself. She ran forward and, using all her strength, launched the sword up to him. It flew close enough to the merchant that he was able to snag it out of the air by the hilt. By this time Massa Makalai had righted himself. He tore the dagger out of his thigh, and, with a glare of intense rage, Massa Makalai held the scimitar in one hand and the bloody dagger in the other. "Your time is up, peddler," the slave general said with determination. Kemu gazed soberly down at the approaching menace. Then he looked out the window and grinned. "No, your time, brother." At that moment, a great cheer went up outside, and Massa Makalai froze in his tracks. Halima looked out the lower window. Through the narrow slit, she could see a crowd of more than 600 men, women, and children pouring out of the city gates and converging on the guard tower. The hubbub of the crowd grew louder as the citizens of Calais approached the tower. Massa Makalai sneered, "The merchant will not leave the city alive. That I promise." Halima gripped the seed and then returned it to the pouch, which she looped around her neck. She threw back her head haughtily. "A man like you could never best a man like him." Massa Makalai stepped menacingly toward her. At that moment, however, the crowd reached the iron door and began to furiously beat on it. "We have guests, General," Halima said with a smile. Massa Makalai threw down his sword and allowed his frown to wax into a sickly grimace of a smile. Gently, he took Halima by the arm and guided her to the door and out into the blinding sunlight. The people, old, snaggle-toothed men, fat, middle-aged women, scampering children, swarmed around Halima, their faces bright and tears of joy running down their faces. They raised Halima onto their shoulders and swept her away. Laughing and weeping, people sang, "Halima, the wise, beautiful daughter of our beloved ruler, has been restored to us. Praise the Great One in the sky." They carried her through the tall gates of the city and into the wide streets of Calais. The crowd grew as word spread of Halima's arrival. Children ran alongside, and women showered the princess with strings of beads and gold finery and draped their finest cloths about her. Halima, accustomed now to the simple ways of the mountain, found herself gaping like a country bumpkin at the magnificence of the city, as though seeing it for the first time. The crowd swept her past street after street of beautiful multi-storied houses built of coral and mortar, with intricately carved wooden doorways chiseled from the massive ebony timber. When they reached the center of the city, the people ran up the great stone steps to the palace, carrying their prize. The palace guards parted in confusion, having never before seen such a torrent of faces. The crowd hurried Halima past giant stone statues that guarded the receiving hall of the king, huge, simple figures of a man and woman at either side of the entrance. They pushed by the crowd of vassals seeking an audience with the king and past the gauntlet of 100 soldiers who stood at attention. They brought her to the throne of Calais, the gold stool wrought by smiths in ancient times. 20 generations of Halima's ancestors sat upon that throne, all brave, wise, good kings. But now, as Halima was rested reverently on the floor before that throne, she saw that the plump body of King Alagbadi filled the seat. He had fattened up considerably, from pleasantly plump to grossly obese, and his rump cheeks spilled over the stool like jelly rolling off the edge of the table. He was covered with thick hides of lion and leopard and oxen. Rings of opal, emerald, and ruby glittered his fingers. A pair of buxom serving girls knelt massaging his feet, while behind him broad-soldiered men servants fanned him with great leaves, chasing away flies. Dozens of pages stood armed with spears and shields of solid gold, lining the path to the throne. Knights on white horses stood beside the king, and young aristocrats from the land of the people of the snake knelt in attendance. After the people rested Halima down, she strode up to the throne, the throng of people waiting, mumbling behind her. King Alagbadi smiled broadly at her and stood, his pot-belly jiggling. He beckoned Halima to the dais, on which their throne sat, and a pair of thick-muscled palace guards escorted her to the side. He threw his chubby arms around her, then turned to the crowd that filled the room. "People of Calais," he said, "welcome your daughter home." Heralds in bright tunics repeated his words loudly so that all could hear. The people cheered, and outside the chamber a huge chorus of voices rang. "By what miracle she has been returned to us! Alive and well and out of the hands of our enemies, whom we believe had put her to death, we do not know. It does not matter. All we know or care is that our beloved Halima is home." To her amazement, Halima saw that big, fat tears were rolling down the young king's face. "People of Calais, go! Spread the word! Halima lives!" he bellowed. Halima turned to the crowd that was pouring from the hall, full of joy, shouting boisterously. "I would speak to them," she said. "You must rest from your journey now, my love," King Alagbadi replied, cutting her off. He shouted to the crowd, "Go! Let songs of thanksgiving fill the streets of our city." He threw up his arms, and as if on cue, some people burst into song. Others quickly picked up the song of thanksgiving, and as they chanted, soldiers began to herd them from the hall. King Alagbadi turned to Halima, still smiling. "That was very clever, Alagbadi," Halima told him. "You and I will speak later. Now you must rest yourself," he said gently, taking her palm with his pudgy hand. He snapped his fingers, and 2 guards stepped forward. "Escort my queen to her chambers." Moments later, Halima found herself in her childhood bedroom. It was unrecognizable now, filled with opulent cushions and saturated with some kind of saccharine scent from the land of the people of the snake. She threw herself on her bedding, pulling on her braided hair and burying her face in silk sheets, screaming a muffled plea. "Great one in the sky, let this be a nightmare from which I can awaken. Can this pig really have taken my father's throne unopposed?" She called a servant and asked for each of her father's old advisers. The Tagunabla, the prime minister, his minister of finance, the mayor of the palace, the Rasamnaba, chief of the slaves of the crown and high executioner, the Kidiranga Naba, head of the cavalry. Each, she learned in turn, had been executed for treason against the new king. Every adviser, every soothsayer and diviner, every physician who specialized in every part of the body from eyes to feet, every slave, and every servant who had been in the palace was gone. Save one. She did learn that Mwendepeli, her father's griot, was alive. If there were one man remaining in the court whom she could trust, it might be he. The old man had enthralled her as a tot with tales of Anansi the spider and educated her in the history of her people and her family, all the way back to the dawn time. Nevertheless, she would have to find out why he had been allowed to remain alive and free. The proverb said, "When a tyrant rules, all the good men can be found in prison." She told her new servants that her first duty was to take libations to the shrine of her deceased father and ask for his blessing. She had the servant summon the old man to meet her by the ancient burial grounds, which stood on a cliff overlooking the sea. Together, she and Wendepele said prayers by the shrine of her father, sharing with his spirit a simple offering of palm wine and bread.
Father, do not travel yet into the lands across the river. I need your spirit here, beside me. Lend me your strength now, Halima said.
She and Wendepele strolled along the rocky shore nearby. They were accompanied by guards, but Halima made sure they were far enough away that their whispering voices were drowned out by the crash of waves. The slight old man bowed his head as he walked beside her in his long cotton robe, which fluttered in the sea breeze.
Your father was a great man, Halima, he said. He is greatly mourned among the people. I shall miss him much. Worthy Wendepele, tell me, what has happened here? She demanded. Word came from Alec Badi's country that you had been married, and then killed in a raid by the Zimbai. There was no other heir of age. The snake people said that, by right, the crown fell to your husband. No one disputed the claim? Halima said in disbelief. What of all my cousins? Some disputed it, but by then the armies of Alec Badi had already marched into the city. We are simple merchants, no match for such a force, as you well know. Now all the royal princes of Kali are guests, hostages really, in the land of the people of the snake. And did not a messenger come from the mountains, from the land of the Abaka, demanding a ransom for me?
Wendepele shook his head, puzzled.
No, your highness, no such party came. And what of Madango, my bodyguard, and my maidservant, Nima? They never returned, unless they took refuge among her people, the fishermen of the southern shore.
Halima hoped this was true, for it was certain that the messengers Queen Rashida sent here with word that Halima was alive among the Abaka had been put to death as soon as they delivered the message to King Alec Badi. What became of my father's counselors? She asked.
Wendepele bowed his head gravely. They were executed for treason, Halima. It was said they insulted the old king, your father, after his death, and stole from his treasury.
Halima spat in the sand contemptuously.
You believe this?
Wendepele said nothing.
Who spoke for them?
Halima demanded, putting her hands on her hips. The old man looked as if he wished the sand could swallow him up.
Halima, princess, a man like King Alec Badi. I am alive only because he thought I was an old fool good only for amusing women and children in his household with songs and fairy tales.
Halima raised her hand to silence him.
You are not a warrior, Wendepele, Halima said. No one demands that you be brave, but I must know where you stand.
The old man looked at her.
I have served your family all my life, I and my father before him, and his father and his. My family has always served the king of Kali.
But there is a new king in the land, Halima reminded him sternly.
To whom do you owe your loyalty? To him or to me?
Old Wendepele stuck out his sunken chest and stared directly into her eyes.
To you, my princess, and to those who share your blood. Kneel and swear, Halima demanded stonily.
The old man struggled to his knees before Halima. She put a hand on his balding, gray-haired head. He swore a solemn oath of loyalty. Halima helped him to his feet. She embraced the gentle old man and whispered,
Great One in the sky, master of the seas and builder of mountains, protect the land of my ancestors.
When Halima returned to her chamber, the servants, all foreigners, sharply told her that she was to prepare herself for a private audience with King Alec Badi. Halima was bathed by the women, and her body perfumed, and then she was given a soothing massage. Falashade, the long-eyelashed young girl from Kemu's caravan, had joined the palace as a servant woman, and it was she who now gently kneaded the princess's flesh. Halima lay on her belly on velvet cushions, sipping a goblet of cool, sweet palm wine, while the servant girl massaged hot oils into her back.
She was trying to think of what she would say to Alec-Badi when they were alone, face to face. She imagined herself haughty and full of disdain. He would not dare harm her now, she thought. A princess could not be quietly done away with like her father's counselors. The people would cry out. She rehearsed in her mind a speech in which she called King Alec-Badi a villain and a usurper, and demanded that he give up the throne and return to his God-forsaken land. Occasionally the prattle of the servant girl intruded on her private thoughts. "You are so fortunate, Your Highness," Falashide was saying. She was a slender, slant-eyed creature with long fingers and a honey-smooth, sing-song voice. "Many women in my country would give their firstborn to be the wife of Alec-Badi." Halima felt a trickle of warm oil run down the hollow of her back, tickling her spine, as the servant's soft hands kneaded her neck and shoulders. Her delicate fingers were surprisingly strong, like that of a baker accustomed to kneading bread. Halima took another sip from the silver chalice full of dark wine. It was an unfamiliar taste, a peculiar concoction of the people of the Snake. "Yes, I am lucky indeed," she said dryly. "He is the richest king of the coast, and the most powerful ruler from here to the Western Sea," the servant girl continued. Halima took in another mouthful of the wine. It was early yet, but she was feeling sleepy. The soft hands on her shoulders and neck relaxed her more. She felt herself sinking into a dreamy haze of contentment. She was unafraid of facing Alec-Badi. "I can handle that rogue," she thought, and ceased planning her speech. Falashide worked her way down Halima's back, drumming her flesh with the edges of her hand. Halima closed her eyes, enjoying the sensation of soft hands kneading the soothing oils into her rump. Continued the serving girl, "Alec-Badi is said to be a lover of exceeding prowess. They all say he makes the pleasing of women an art." Halima's head was swimming now, and her tongue felt the bitter aftertaste of the wine. "You are almost ready for the marriage bed," Falashide told her, pushing her hand between her buttocks. Halima groggily rolled over and forced herself to sit up. She picked up a silver goblet and shook it angrily. "What is this?" she demanded. The servant girl smiled. "It contains an herb to relax you and to help you give yourself over to passion. I was told to prepare you for—" Halima tossed the contents of the goblet into the serving girl's face. "Get out!" she cried. Young Falashide spluttered and gasped for air. "Get out!" Halima repeated. Bowing several times, the young servant backed out of the room. Other servants came and dressed Halima to meet the king. She stood solemnly as they put her into a beaded loincloth bejeweled with rubies and a long gown of fine diaphanous silk. They adorned her wrists and ankles with thick bracelets of gold. Like shackles, Halima thought grimly. The servants ushered her toward the private chamber of Alec-Badi, once her father's bedchamber. Halima walked uncertainly on tiptoes as a servant guided her. The aphrodisiac with which she had been plied made her lightheaded. Her thoughts were becoming muddy. She was angry about having been tricked into taking the drink, but now she could barely remember why. Her loins felt warm, as if she were squatting over hot coals, and her nipples tingled so much it was difficult to keep from stroking them. She dumbly obeyed the servant's direction to the door. For a moment, everything went blank. Suddenly, Halima realized that the servant had left her inside a darkened room, which was thick with sweet, flowery incense. Only a single flickering torch gave light to the cave-like chamber. Somewhere a muette, a type of lute, was playing a gentle love ballad. Halima felt no fear. The potion she'd been given dampened such sensations. If anything, she felt a giddy courage. Alec-Badi appeared out of the clouds of swirling incense. He held the stringed instrument in his hand, and Halima realized it was he who had been singing. It had been his high, sweet, boyish voice. He was dressed regally in a long purple robe that fell to his ankles, and he wore a shy smile. Halima realized just how young he was. He was a boy, really, only a few years older than she. "Halima," he said softly, "your name means gentle, doesn't it, in your language?" Halima said nothing. Her tongue felt thick and heavy in her mouth. All she could muster was a frown of disapproval. "You are a noble girl, Halima," Alagbadi said. "You believe in all the fine things, I know. Duty, mercy, love, courage. You think I'm wicked, and perhaps you're right." He gestured at his slender arms and pear-shaped body. "I am not a great warrior, Halima. If I must use my cunning, it's because it's the only way I can survive, not because I'm a bad man. I know you are angry with me, and you have good reason. I'm ashamed myself of what has passed. I apologize for any hurt I caused you." He stared into Halima's eyes with grave sincerity. She nodded grudgingly, accepting his apology. Alagbadi stepped closer to her. "I want you to be my queen, Halima, my first wife, and rule by my side all the lands I conquer. All of Kali, the lands of the Zambai, and of the Abaka, of the people of the Snake, all this will be yours, as well as mine." Halima's sleepy eyes fought to meet his penetrating gaze. Alagbadi stepped closer. "You are so beautiful, Halima, more beautiful than I remember. Do you think any man under the sun would not want you as his bride? Turn to the light so that I might see you better." He put a finger on Halima's jaw and gently turned her face, presenting her delicate profile to the torchlight. Halima looked at his bejeweled hand and was finally able to cut through the haze of potion and answer him. "You think I'm a jewel for your plump fingers," she scolded in a voice that sounded strangely languorous. "You are a jewel I will possess." He put his hands on her waist and drew her close to him so that his big belly squashed against hers and her hard nipples grazed his chest. He bent and whispered in her ear, "I will take you to places you have never been, Halima, places in you dark and secret. I have visited the pleasure palaces of the East and the hidden temples of the South. I have lain with buxom women of the fertile valley and mated with prisoners from the caves of the icy north, and from each I have learned mysteries that I will teach you." He slid a practiced hand between her legs, and she could feel the aphrodisiac rushing through her veins now, ordering to surrender all she had. She tried to remember how much she loved her husband, Shamari, and detested this wretch, but her thoughts were cloudy as a muddy lake, and she could not even picture her husband's face. Still, summoning all her will, she pulled away and laughed at the king contemptuously. Her hands were back at her hips. "Alagbadi, save your honey talk for silly servant girls. I have a husband among the Bigbaka." He shoved her back so that she stumbled onto the stone floor. "Your father, Babatunde, promised you to me, and I will have you," Alagbadi said. "It is my right to have you as my wife." He pulled off his robe and loomed naked before her, his huge belly swelling like an elephant's, and then he pounced upon her. Halima fought him like an angry cat, scratching and clawing. They wrestled on the floor, toppling porcelain vases and snapping finely carved wooden stools around the chamber. At last, the young king huffed and panted from exhaustion. Halima was able to pin him face down on the stone floor, his girlishly slender arms twisted behind his back. "Guards!" Alagbadi gasped weakly, like a boy yelling for his mother. "Yes," Halima taunted, "call a man to help you." At that insult, the fat king roared like a boar in fury and bucked, throwing her off. Alagbadi caught Halima round the waist and with a sudden burst of strength hoisted her up and tossed her onto her father's bed. He belly-flopped on top of her. On her back, Halima kicked furiously, clipping him a few times on the jaw and chest with her heels. But at last he caught hold of her legs. "Am I man enough for you now, proud woman?" he growled. Halima squirmed, but she could not rest free. The fat king wrapped one arm around her violently kicking legs, holding them still. With his other hand, he clawed down and ripped away her pretty gown. Halima screeched in fury at the rending sound. Just as easily, Alik-Badi grabbed hold of her beaded loincloth and wrenched it away. He pitched it into the dark. Halima lay before him naked, trying to shield her small triangle with her hands. "I am going to teach you humility, daughter of Babatunde," Alik-Badi hissed. "In your own father's bed, I will enjoy teaching you, and you will enjoy learning." Halima felt tears of shame rolling down her cheeks. "Why am I so weak?" she thought. "I must fight him. Oh, Shamari, why did you send me so far from you? Why are you not here to rescue me from this shame?" Alik-Badi grabbed her ankles and forced them back so that they hovered behind her ears. Dripping hoggish sweat all over her, he rasped, "I will plant my seed in you. You will bear me a son, and we will begin our dynasty that will rule all the lands that the eye can see, from the ocean to the top of the Silver Mountain. Now, prepare for the drilling of your life, Kalian." Alik-Badi's words hit her like a splash of ice water. Halima planted her hand on his fleshy chest, holding him off. The usurper looked down at her in surprise. Halima glared at him defiantly, feeling her head beginning to clear. Through clenched teeth, she declared, "You had a chance to make me your woman when the Zimbai attacked our caravan, and you failed. We saw you, running like a frightened girl." With all her strength, she pushed him off her. "Away! Away, you foul pig! Or by my father's ghost, I will swear, I will tell the entire world what a coward you are." Alik-Badi rolled slowly away. He sat slumped, his belly sagging. Halima drew up her knees protectively. "If you ever touch me again, I will tell every servant, every visitor, every guard, every man, woman, and child what happened, and none will follow you, either from Kali or the Zimbai or the people of the Snake, for all people value courage and hate the coward." Alik-Badi drew back, regarding her like a disappointed little boy, his manhood wilting. Halima promised, "Leave me alone, and I will hold my tongue, and sit by your throne, and call you husband, in name." Alik-Badi continued to sulk. "I told the people that tonight we would finally consummate our marriage, and it is our ancient custom to display the stained sheets on which the bride has surrendered her virgin blood. If the sheet is not displayed tomorrow, I will be a laughingstock." Halima folded her arms. "My marriage is already consummated, Alik-Badi." She let him stew for a moment, then suggested, "In the villages in the hills of the ironsmiths, where my father's kin reside, there is a similar custom. And there, when a man's bride is not a virgin, he sometimes cuts himself and spills his own blood on the sheet." Alik-Badi frowned dubiously. Halima could tell he was not enchanted with the idea. He climbed abruptly to his feet and clapped his hands. A lithe youth in servant's robes appeared at the doorway, a good-looking boy about the same age as Halima. She covered her nakedness modestly, although the youth wore a mask of indifference as impenetrable as any ceremonial mask. "Lend me your sword, boy," Alik-Badi demanded. The servant obeyed, drawing from his belt a short, sharp blade. "Now, put out your hand." Slowly, and unable to disguise his dismay, the boy stretched out his hand. The king held the youth's wrist and quickly drew a thin red line across the palm. The youth closed his eyes and grimaced in pain and bewilderment. He looked like a frightened animal, stunned and unable to conceive of the reason for his torment. Alik-Badi forced the lad to lean over the bed
so that his bright scarlet blood dripped onto the sheet. Halima looked down in disgust as the boy's blood poured freely onto the sheet, and she recalled how her real husband, Shamari, bravely shed his blood for her on the day he faked her execution. What a swinish mockery of a man this was by comparison. She wanted to crawl into a bath and wash his sweet, evil stink off her. Finally, after inspecting the widening circle of scarlet on the bed and finding it satisfactory, Alekbadi released the youthful victim. The boy stood up, holding his hand and wincing in pain. "You can go," Alekbadi told him simply, turning away as if the boy had only brought in a cup of palm wine. The youth bowed weakly, regaining his composure. Before he scurried out, he tarried for 1 second too long and glanced at the tableau before him. Halima, crouched on the marriage bed, apparently unsatisfied, her husband, Alekbadi, standing sullenly, his flaccid manhood lying dormant in the shade of his big belly. A bitter smile flitted across the wounded boy's lips as he turned to go. But the king glimpsed the glint of contempt in the youth's eyes, that belittling look that said, "I may be your slave, but I am more of a man than you." Alekbadi allowed the youth to turn completely, and then buried the sword in his back. The youth shrieked and toppled over, groaning. "Gods!" Alekbadi cried. Halima began screaming at the top of her lungs as the handsome youth writhed on the floor like a crushed insect, coughing up blood. 4 burly guards rushed into the king's bedchamber, spears in hand. "This traitor tried to kill us," Alekbadi told them. "Search the palace for accomplices. Then tell me how an assassin came so close to my beloved wife." "Yes, ruler of rulers," they responded. The guards bowed and barreled out, 2 of them hustling the still twitching corpse away. Alekbadi turned to Halima, who kneeled in bed, weeping, aghast at the king's wanton butchery. He faced her with a mild smile, as if he were quite pleased with his sanguine behavior. "I am not good. I am not brave, but I am unyielding, Halima, and I will prevail. I will eat the heart of your tall mountain king, and I will make you beg for me to be your master. This I swear." He turned and stalked out of the chamber.